Vermont State Senate here with an update on Vermont's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm going to really offer just three fairly brief updates tonight. The first is in relation to something that the governor announced earlier today. And then the second and third items will be actions taken by the Senate yesterday to help sort of protect the industries that have been most hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic economically and try to provide some needed cash so that they'll be in a position to slowly start to rebuild. The other is some emergency housing. So I think the first update, which is going to be critical for many parents and kids throughout the state, is the governor and the Secretary of Education announced that they have every intention that school will return to normal this coming fall. Now, obviously, with the specter of COVID-19 and a possible resurgence, it won't quite feel the same, but what is really being communicated is that at this time, parents and students should plan that students will be returning to the school facilities when school is set to resume. Now, there may be some slight deviations in the way that works. It might be that school starts right after Labor Day instead of starting in late August, which is what most schools do. And there could very well be some other modifications. There may be some teachers, for instance, who fall into particular categories that are more at risk of COVID infection. So how they'll integrate in is something that the teachers will work with the administrators to figure out. There will also likely be some physical space changes, meaning the number of students in a particular room may, if there's a limitation, say of 20, that might require some changes in the way classrooms are structured. And it might even require that the teachers' assignments are slightly adjusted to reflect the need to have people in safer physical environments to reduce the potential spread of the infection. There will also be some operational changes. There'll be more frequent cleaning, I think, of the classrooms between sittings, and I think some of the initial reaction has or guidance has been that there will also possibly be checking the temperatures of students as they pop in, which I imagine will be the little white wands that shoot at someone's forehead and give an immediate digital read. So if there will be a number of variables, and I think every single school facility is going to have to manage the particulars of their school setting. But I think in general, the idea was that they did not want people to spend the entire summer not quite knowing what to plan for. And that applies not just to the students and their parents, but also to the staff and administrators. I know that it's been extremely challenging for many families who have had to do some homeschooling while trying to do remote work from home. It's put a strain on households as they deal with the stay-at-home order and not being able to move about as freely as normal. For teachers, they had to change on a dime and start to do remote learning, so like a brand new method of delivering their education. So I think in some ways it's a very confidence-building announcement today that we should plan on in-person K through 12 or pre-K through 12 education in the fall. Still have to be vigilant and guard against potential spread, and things could change. They've also asked school districts to make sure that they're ready in case there's an outbreak that necessitates going back to remote learning. So there'll be many more details in the coming weeks, but I thought it was important to shed a light on the governor's announcement today that is the full intention of the Agency of Education, and they've been in touch with the superintendents throughout the state, the Principals Association, as well as representatives of the teaching profession. The other two things I want to briefly talk about are two of the actions taken by the Vermont Senate yesterday. I believe it was yesterday, though time starts to blur during COVID-19. As you know from previous updates, right out of the gates, my attitude and what I conveyed to the governor was that When it came to saving people's lives or protecting people from the spread of infection, we wanted him and his team to spend the money quickly, keep people safe, and then we would true up later. That has resulted so far in about $250 million worth of spending out of the $1.25 billion federal grant we received. So it's a big sum of money, but it went for medical supplies, personal protective equipment, food, and a number of other things that were true emergency needs to meet people's basic needs. And I should add, it also included housing almost 2,000 people who were homeless in safe places while providing them services and meals where they were asked to isolate. So those are the kinds of things we use $250 million for. What the Senate voted on, and we expect the House to quickly agree with, were two things. The first was what we're calling the first phase of small business relief. The total amount of money that we have authorized is $70 million. $50 million would go towards cash, basically cash grants distributed by the tax department to go to businesses that we refer to who collect what we call trust taxes. A trust tax, I used to be the chair of our Senate's Finance Committee, so this is why I'm geeking out. A trust tax is a tax that is paid by the consumer, collected by the store or restaurant, and then that store or restaurant is the one that sends it to the state government. So examples of trust taxes would be the rooms tax, meals tax, sales tax. Those are the three most common. So those businesses were effectively told they had to shut down completely on March 16. So lodging, restaurants, bars. So $50 million and most retail. So $50 million will get right out the door. And we did something very unusual for the legislature, which is we said to the governor and his team, we don't really have time to design the perfect program. We need the money to get out the door to help stabilize these sectors of the economy who are going through a terrible, terrible time right now. So we have given some general parameters about how we hope the money will be used, and given the administration a tremendous amount of flexibility, and hope and expect that they will make sure that the money goes to those industries and those businesses that need it the most, and that will help in the long term pay dividends for the state. Because if some of these businesses never return, that means we don't see the wages that they pay return. It means we don't see the tax revenues that are generated return. So in some ways, by making the $50 million of investment in these businesses who have been ordered to close by the government, we are making a longer term investment in our state's economy. The remaining 20 million, so 50 million goes to those businesses that are either retail, bars, restaurants, lodging. The remaining 20 million go to other businesses that do not collect and remit those kinds of taxes to the state. So there will be a whole number of businesses that are out there that are not, don't fall into those particular categories, but are sectors that have been hit very hard. And we have given an additional 20 million, also very flexible, for the governor's team to move forward and get the cash out the door. I want to put this in the proper context, which is the federal government's Payroll Protection Program, which the shorthand is PPP. This is the signature response by Congress to try to support businesses who were ordered to close. The money that's coming into the state of Vermont through that program is massive compared to the 70 million I just described. So one of our other goals has been to make sure that our state agencies are working with businesses and nonprofits to maximize the benefits of that PPP program. For those of you who are less familiar with the PPP, and for those of you who do not own or operate a business or nonprofit, you may be less familiar, but the way the program was structured is that technically you get a low interest loan with a fairly short period of time to pay it back. But if you use that money, that loan money, for payroll, and then a little bit of money for your typical business expenses, if you do it the right way and spend the money on the right things, the money gets converted into a grant that you don't have to pay back. So you can imagine how literally, I think hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars have come into the state of Vermont through that program. And we want to make sure that those are converted into grants as frequently as possible, because that money will stay here and help pay people's salaries. They will in turn pay income taxes, and it supports the whole cycle of our economy. So that was the small business relief piece. The governor had asked us to put more on the table first, and I'll just briefly explain why we have chosen this first phase approach and not do the whole thing all at once. Early last week, so about 9 days ago, while there was a press conference with some businesses saying to the legislature, why are you delaying, take action immediately, even though we had only just recently received the proposal, I had other businesses contacting me saying, hold on, not so fast. If you take the governor's proposal as it is and just adopt it, my business won't get anything. And so it does take a little time to make sure you're getting it right. And we've seen Congress rush job these kinds of things in the past, and then all the money goes to, the Olive Garden chain, not to pick on them, or some other, large national entity that really probably doesn't need the money quite like an independent restaurant or business would right here in Vermont. So we have decided that get $70 million of grant money to businesses out the door, and then we will come back up with the second phase in short order. So our committees have already turned to the job of getting the second phase of money out. The second thing that we did yesterday was to approve the spending of $23 million to build permanent housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. So I'll briefly explain why this federal grant money was used for homelessness housing as a priority. So since the outbreak of COVID-19, as I mentioned, we housed almost 2,000 people throughout the state in motels and multifamily units, hotels, because we wanted to keep them safe, knowing that if they were either congregating outdoors or in shelters, they're in close proximity, and the potential for spread of infection with vulnerable health situations could really wreak havoc. That cost a not insignificant amount of money, and that money came out of our federal grant, the $1.25 billion grant. So there's really two reasons for making this investment of $23 million. The first is that basically within a couple weeks, most of these individuals are going to be out of those hotels and motels, and it's not clear what's going to happen to them. So we've been trying to figure out a plan in the short term. But knowing that there may be a resurgence of COVID out into the fall or early winter, we want to have a system in place so that we don't have to scramble like we did back in March, but actually have a place immediately to turn to, a series of facilities scattered around the state to make sure that people can be safely housed. It also addresses, so it's using the money in anticipation of a potential return of COVID infection rates at the end of the year. The other thing is, each year we spend about $4 million as a state on overnight motel rooms for people who are suffering from homelessness. This includes not only people who are chronically homeless, people who are frequently out in the streets, but maybe when it gets very cold, need to find shelter inside. It includes people who lose their job or have some economic calamity which results in their being homeless. It includes people who are impacted by domestic or sexual violence and need a safe place to be. That program 8 or 9 years ago used to be about $2 million a year. It now has jumped to about $4 million a year. So every year we're spending $4 million to put people up in motels, which does provide a safe place to be, but very little else. And so using this $23 million to build about 200 units of safe housing throughout the state for this particular set of Vermonters means that we can reduce that $4 million a year just to motels and put some of that money over to serve people in a more appropriate setting in ways that we can help people become self-sufficient and transition successfully to permanent housing if that's going to be possible for the particular individual. The units of housing that are envisioned are in a few locations around the state. Brattleboro area has a facility, I think, that has already been identified, which would be about 40 units of housing in Brattleboro. White River Junction, another 40 or 50. In Burlington, there would be 2 new facilities to serve this population, one of which would be providing safe, confidential housing for people impacted by domestic violence or sexual violence. And then in Bennington, it will be to renovate a facility to make it possible or more appropriate for families with children who become homeless. So $23 million in the grand scheme of our housing needs is not a huge sum of money, but it was the best judgment of the Senate that we needed to move quickly because these facilities exist right now. They're ready to be purchased. If we wait too long, we might not be able to use this federal money and the properties may be gone. So those are the 2 first things we've done really coming from the legislature's point of view. We've been working with the governor's team on both of them. We know that we have more to do on the small business relief side and frankly more on the housing side. And we're continuing to try to figure out how to balance all the amazing array of difficult needs right now so that we use this $1.25 billion in a way that not just meets people's immediate emergency needs, but results in investments that will pay dividends for many years to come for many Vermonters. So with that, I'm going to wrap and say thank you for tuning in. I'll be back with my Ask Me Anything tomorrow. I've received a number of emails and questions over the last few days because I put out a broad email about where I see gun safety legislation moving forward. So a number of the questions I respond to will relate to that. And then I'll probably have about half of the time to talk about legislation that relates to the way we're handling criminal justice reform issues and some law enforcement reform issues in the legislature, because that's obviously front of mind for so many people. So I hope you'll tune in at 5:30. I will be doing an impromptu Ask Me Anything. So if you have questions, you can feel free to put them on this Facebook comment page or email me directly, and I'm happy to do my best to respond during my Ask Me Anything tomorrow. So with that, I hope you continue to do everything to stay safe, and I'll see you next time.